But I think the important lesson here, if we go back 150 years, was be smart about where you build your infrastructure when it comes to mobility. What we saw with the Transcontinental was that it was built so quickly and so fast that we didn't think about the ecology of where we were going and where we were sending people. And so one of the biggest environmental disasters in human history, the Dust Bowl, was a product of building this new mobility system without thinking about the environment that underlays it.
So there was a lot of time early on where we didn't really know precisely what we were doing, but we were all very excited about it, which has a lot of corollary to what's going on today with these new types of vehicles and new technologies, and trying to distinguish between the hype of what's possible and the reality of what's going to be the business plan and what are going to be the impacts that we're willing to allow in order to operate this new type of transportation.
Ohio State has had great thought leadership dating back even to the World War II era of the power of bringing together interdisciplinary research centers to solve big problems.
One of the things that we're interested in studying here at Ohio State is this question of sustainable urban systems. A city doesn't exist in isolation. It is really connected because of the transportation networks, because of the infrastructure, because of the economic activity, where people live.
I would say that while CAR of 30 years ago was predominantly an engineering organization, today we do so much in collaboration with colleagues who are on the business, legal, social sciences side, that it's actually kind of a new, exciting challenge for us.
So transportation as we know it is changing. It's really going through a revolution. But what's changing is there's a whole slew of new technology that's led to new options, and people are fundamentally thinking differently about how they get around and how goods and services are provided as well.
A couple of our projects touch on different components like food access, distributed energy storage, plastic waste and recycling, and connectivity through mobility. And one of the things that we tend to focus on is mobility and transportation kind of being a foundational piece to all of these things.
The world as we know it is shifting towards connected vehicles.
How do you communicate, with things like stop signs and other vehicles?
As we bring more and more technology on board the car, what does it mean to have the vehicle connected to the infrastructure, connected to the outside world?
Testing is going to be very critical. With this system of systems, there are going to be so many different test cases. It has to be done in simulation. And if technology works in simulation, then you have some confidence that it's going to work in reality. When we start thinking about future of the mobility, I think it's going to be more involved and it's going to be more connected.
That's the importance of connectivity. They can see beyond the human eye. They can see beyond human vision. Because we know knowledge of the traffic lights, we know how the elevation changes, we know how vehicles behave. We react right now by predicting all of that.
We are moving quickly towards an era in which we will see more and more autonomous vehicles.
We've held out the automobile as this thing that liberates us, but does it? I talk to my students all the time. What can you not do when you're driving? Like everything, hopefully. All the students say, I text, don't tell me that, right? How could we create true freedom and liberation in our mobility? In the sense that we are able to do other things instead of being focused on not killing someone, really, when we're riding around.
Part of my research asks this question, whether people feel happier or more satisfied with their trip if they multitask during trips. So they conduct certain activity, they work, they eat, sleep, or interact with other people. And we found that the more people interact with others or doing activities during trip, more likely they like it. So in the arrival of autonomous vehicles, when people have this opportunity to engage more in activities on board and free themselves from the driving tasks, then more likely they enjoy the trip.
Because of advancements in sensing and onboard computing, we are able to have these really complex optimization algorithms running in the vehicle, making use of all of this connectivity and eventually implementing it using automation and getting these fuel economy benefits.
Using this connectivity and automation function, it is possible to take today's vehicles and increase their fuel economy by another 10, 20%. And when you spread this across the community of vehicles that are on the roads every day, the benefits to society and to the environment could be significant.
Global air travel is still growing. It feels really established from our point of view in the United States. In other parts of the world, aviation is still new. Right now, the greenhouse gas emissions from the air transportation industry is about 2% of the global total, which 2 sounds like a small number, but it's one industry that's responsible for that. So they're reconciling as an industry with this really complex jurisdictional problem. Who is responsible for reducing carbon emissions related with this type of transportation? The bigger question of the emissions from air travel is really about how do we hold airlines accountable, and what are the procedural mechanisms at a global scale and at a national scale that can achieve that.
Our society functions on the assumption of unlimited amounts of fuel. We have to start thinking about consuming less, and what does that look like? Larger scale, lower carbon emitting mass transportation has to be part of our solution.
We all know that mass transportation is the most efficient way to get people around. We can work really, really hard to get a 5% improvement in fuel economy, reduction in emissions. But if I just put another person in the car, I've immediately doubled the effective fuel economy.
Really, the way we get to sustainable mobility is to basically concentrate people into as few vehicles as possible. And of course, use other forms of active transportation, such as walking and biking, to supplement that.
I've been working and bicycling and using transit for most of my life, and it's been like part of life until I moved to the US, and I realized it's very different patterns.
We've had a younger generation come of age who maybe did grow up in the suburbs, enjoyed some of the benefits of the suburbs, but also some of the costs in terms of always being car dependent, for example, and really enjoying the fact that they can be in a city and walk to places or bike easily to places.
One of the reasons why we look at things such as walking, biking, and public transit as forms of mobility is because the automobile is a very inequitable form of mobility.
Even when we're talking about electric cars, these still come with a huge amount of environmental costs because we're talking about consuming them at the same rate as we've consumed fuel guzzling cars, right? And actually the opportunity to purchase electric cars is proliferating our consumption of cars. And so we're not actually diminishing our fuel consumption, we're expanding it.
So we need a more balanced transportation system. We need a transportation ecosystem where we integrate multiple modes and make things more accessible for more people.
What I think will be happening going forward is that forward-thinking public transit agencies, and Cooke is one of them, will find different ways of integrating themselves to provide multimodal mobility that incorporates many different ways of thinking about how to go from point A to point B.
We have to focus on the people as well and making sure that transportation and mobility is accessible to everyone. I think that is the ultimate goal of what a smart city should be.
Sustainability is more than just our emissions. It's also how we engage with communities and providing equal access to opportunity.
And as we think about, how do we develop the cities of the future, thinking about how do we take advantage of these network effects to really help make cities the engines of economic productivity and innovation, as well as cities that are socially just.
If we can measure emissions, or we can measure sound, or we can measure air pollutants, how do we translate that into a human health impact?
This is something we need to pay more attention to in order to increase not just environmental benefit, but also health benefit for physical health and mental health alike.
I think that we as a society are absolutely equipped to tackle these problems and solve these challenges, but also we need to get better at working together to find common solutions and to find common ground sometimes, because some of these issues can be very divisive. And it really is the perfect opportunity for universities to partner with cities and with communities to work towards those solutions.